Rayan Cherki, Aït-Nouri, Tijjani, Reijnders. I mean, Manchester City have moved big in the transfer window so far, and they've moved early. Prior to the Club World Cup, of course, which gives you huge financial incentive. So I understand that from the perspective of Manchester City. But look, they're not done. This is the biggest rebuild that Manchester City have undergone since post 2016-17, in which they obviously had that underwhelming first season under Guardiola. I want to talk a little bit about Manchester City's transfer market business so far, and also what it might indicate for the style and the tactics that Manchester City might be moving towards playing, because Guardiola always reinvents himself. I think people have this idea that Guardiola sticks to one system and he's quite rigid and he's not adaptable, but Guardiola is somebody who gives you the blueprint, and whilst people are copying his previous blueprint, reinvents himself and picks the next sort of weaknesses of opposition in world football to exploit. And I certainly think that the signings of Cherki, Aït-Nouri and Reijnders are an indication as to perhaps the style and way that Guardiola does want to play. So I'll go into that in a little bit more depth in the rest of the video. And I also want to touch a little bit upon some of the other signings and names that are rumoured to be linked with Manchester City as well. This is a big summer for Manchester City, and I think they really need to bridge that gap given what happened last season, as well as the departure of Kevin De Bruyne. I think before we go any further in this video, Kevin De Bruyne, a legend of Manchester City and arguably their best ever player, or our best ever player. I'm a Manchester City fan, for those of you who don't know, but I'm speaking a little bit more objectively as a football analyst, I suppose, in this video. So yeah, as a Manchester City fan, I'll certainly miss Kevin De Bruyne. He's an absolutely wonderful footballer, and what he offered Manchester City was numerous things. I mean, first, that game-breaking passing quality, whether that's from the flanks, whether that's from deep, whether it's a through ball down the middle. In a similar way, actually, Trent Alexander-Arnold leaving Liverpool gets rid of their game-breaking passing quality from the flanks and from deep as well. And it's interesting how both teams are probably looking towards replacing that quality and building the team around that absence in general. I think Manchester City have done it in an interesting way. Rayan Cherki coming in, we were linked prior to Morgan Gibbs-White, and perhaps that's a transfer that might happen later on in the window or in future seasons, but I think they were priced out of that move, shifted their attention and focused to getting that Cherki deal done. And they're a little bit different, those two players. I say a little bit, they're fairly different, but they replace some of De Bruyne's qualities in different ways. I don't think that they do all of them together, and I think Cherki actually has some qualities that De Bruyne probably doesn't necessarily excel in as much. They're completely different players, but Cherki, I think, is really good in the small spaces between the lines. De Bruyne obviously is good at doing that as well, but he's a lot more of a playing outside or in front of the defensive block. He can play these passes from the flank, whether that's completely by the touchline or whether that's a little bit more inward in that half space. He always finds that sort of corridor of uncertainty. I was watching an interview by Thomas Frank, actually. He was talking about his defensive principles. Obviously, he's moved now to Tottenham Hotspurs. This was in preparation for the overlap video we did covering Thomas Frank's appointment at Spurs. And one principle that he had that he doesn't move away from is the idea that you can't let that ball go into that corridor of uncertainty underneath your defensive line. And De Bruyne was the master of finding that pass. So he must have been Thomas Frank's worst nightmare to come up against. Cherki, he can play those passes. He's 2-footed. He plays a lot of reverse passes from the half spaces, but he's a lot more of a small space player, in my opinion. He's got a good little burst to get past players, but he's not somebody who will be sprinting 30 or 40 yards in transition and playing a pass while sprinting full speed in behind the defensive line. Morgan Gibbs-White is a player who's more in line with that sort of profile, which is why he was probably being looked at by Manchester City as well as the homegrown nature. But Cherki is somebody who I think is a wonderfully brilliant footballer. There's been criticism online about him moving to Manchester City and playing under Guardiola and how that might, you know, strip away all of his maverick quality. But I don't think that that's necessarily going to be the case. I think Jack Grealish is often cited as the case study when people talk about that being the case for Mavericks under Guardiola. But when you look at some of the other players that Guardiola's managed and brought the best out of, particularly his wingers, I think that is disingenuous to talk about his ability to maximize players and wingers and restrict them instead in a robotic manner. You look at the likes of Leroy Sané, for example, who played his best football and peaked at Manchester City. He's actually played as a two-sided winger at Manchester City rather than only playing down the right wing, which he did primarily prior to joining Manchester City. Raheem Sterling's another one of those players who I'm a huge fan of. I absolutely love Raheem Sterling's game, but he played on both sides, maximised his quality under Guardiola and looked absolutely brilliant. You look to the likes of Phil Foden, who's had brilliant seasons, won the PFA Player of the Year, played as a false nine. Guardiola's played him in a more freer manner, especially in that false nine season. He had the ability to roam to the flanks on both sides, but also drop deep and get on the ball. Who else has he maximised? Look, the list goes on. Bernardo Silva, although he was a bit more exciting, and I can understand the concerns about, you know, taking players who play in big space teams and then moving them into a more possession heavy side, and fans lose the ability to see them play and express that magic quality as often. I understand that criticism, particularly in Cherki's case. Bernardo Silva moving from Monaco had that same sort of arc, but Bernardo Silva was still extremely impressive as a right winger, and then he's moved into attacking midfield, and then now he's the captain in defensive midfield, and his qualities have been maximised by Guardiola in each system, in each position. He's the captain now. He wouldn't regret his move to Manchester City at all. So even if Rayan Cherki is perhaps not as exciting as he was at Lyon, at Manchester City, I think he will still be as good, if not better, because Guardiola knows how to utilise his players. His biggest strength to me is his ability to look at all of the players he has at his disposal, look at their strengths and weaknesses, and then platform them in tandem with the players around them to get the best quality out of the team in general. Look, you look at Tijjani Reijnders, who's come in, and I think he's a brilliant footballer for a number of reasons. He can play as a 6, as an 8, as a box-to-box who can crash in the final third and get goals as well. But when you're thinking about how they might pair him with somebody else, Rodri coming back makes perfect sense for Reijnders' introduction, because one, he replaces an aging Gundogan, but also he can replace Gundogan's ability to get goals when Gundogan is retiring, or if he leaves at the end of next season or this window, if that is to be the case. And then Rayan Aït-Nouri. I think Rayan Aït-Nouri talks to some of the tactical changes in world football at the moment, and Guardiola's ability to clock onto that very early on. I've said numerous times that the ability for fullbacks to attack space in the final third unmarked is second to none in world football at the moment. That's where your best players, well, not your best players, but that's where some of your best players should be playing, because they can get into the final third unmarked essentially. And it's very hard for teams to pick up a player running from their final third, from the flanks all the way past the midfield line, all the way into the opposition's box. PSG got a lot of their success in the Champions League final and in the campaign throughout the last year, doing the same thing with Hakimi and Nuno Mendes. We tried it a little bit with Nico O'Reilly last season, and he was brilliant. He popped up in the box a few times and got some very important goals. Rayan Aït-Nouri profiles almost like a technical number 8. Although he's played at left back and he understands the positioning from that side, he's not the best 1v1 defender, and it's interesting to see that move away from true pragmatic 1v1 defensive quality in your back line. When we won the treble, obviously Ake and Akanji were played as those fullbacks, and they're very different to the likes of Rico Lewis, Mateus Nunes, Rayan Aït-Nouri and Nico O'Reilly. These are players who are essentially midfielders, all 4 of them. But I think Guardiola's understood now that the spaces in attack are being found by late arriving fullbacks. So Guardiola's moves centrally. He's playing as the left centre-back. I think he'll be first choice. Diaz and Kustanov probably in that right centre-back position. Stones if he is fit. And I hope he does stay fit, because he's second to none in that centre-back position when he is fit. But I think that's sort of the centre-back pairing with your attacking full-backs who have the ability to underlap and almost have this free role going forward. Manchester City are actually linked with Tino Livramento, who I think would be a massive upgrade on that right-back position that we do have. And again, like Rayan Aït-Nouri, can do that same thing in terms of his contributions in the middle and final third, underlapping but also overlapping. I think it's more important actually for the right-sided fullback to be somebody who has the capacity to overlap and play some crosses, as well as just holding width on that flank, because our right-wing options are primarily players who cut inside and have that left-footed quality, especially moving into that half space. Oscar Bob, I'm not even mentioned, who's coming back. Savinho on that side. Phil Foden or Cherki can also play on that flank. Bernardo Silva if he does need to as well. So somebody on that right, fullback position who can play and hold the width a little bit, but also the ability to float and attack the box inside, particularly with those reverse passes that Savinho and Cherki and Bob and Foden can play from that right-hand side. We used to see that underlapping run from Kevin De Bruyne, and then he would hit that cross inside off of the back of that. But now you don't have De Bruyne. I don't necessarily see a lot of our midfielders making that run and making that cross. So I think maybe we need to look to get that quality from our fullback positions. Nico Gonzalez is somebody I'll mention as having that capacity to maybe make that underlapping run and cross. Tijjani Reijnders again is somebody else who could probably do that. Rodri sitting in those circumstances, but also he has the ability to be a box-to-box player as well. I'd prefer if he does sit a little bit deeper, particularly for his edge of the box, long shot quality. But yeah, look, that's sort of, I think, the trends shape-wise that explain some of the transfers that we've made so far. I do think that Manchester City and Guardiola are looking to play a little bit more attacking. Teams play very man-to-man in their high press, and you need technical quality all over the park to beat that initial pressure. And then if you do go long, you need players who can run in behind. Marmoush coming in January has showcased that quality. Haaland as well up top can showcase that quality as well. Against stubborn defenses, you need your small space players who have a brilliant ability to unlock the stubborn defenses in very minimal space, and Cherki and Foden and Oscar Bob and Doku, who's slowly getting there as well, all have that sort of quality. You need your pragmatic midfielders to win the ball and track back in big space, which has been a big problem for Manchester City in last season. But with Rodri coming back, with Tijjani Reijnders being signed, with Nico Gonzalez finding his form and also showing his quality as a box-to-box midfielder, these are all players who can kind of make up for that loss of quality that Manchester City had last season. And then you've got your centre-backs reinforcements that you had in January. Vitor Reis, who was very impressive, albeit a little bit raw in the first game of the Club World Cup, and Kusanov, who's very quick and very impressive after that first initial sort of tough game against Chelsea. Yeah, Manchester City are under a scary rebuild. I think they'll probably play in a 2-2-6 kind of way when they really want to impose that quality against top teams in possession. But you need 1v1 quality at the back. And I think Guardiola has that. I think Kusanov can develop into having that with his pace. You got two players in front of them in sort of Rodri and Reijnders, for example, or Rodri and Gonzalez. I think Bernardo Silva we're seeing the pivot as well. Can have the capacity to probably drop one player from the midfield, probably a little bit deeper. So whether that's Aït-Nouri as one of the inverted three in front of a back two, or whether that is sort of three flat midfielders and you push both your fullbacks on. Look, there's a lot of capacity to rotate, keep things fresh, and have players who are hungry, but also who are wanting to destroy teams, play really aggressively, play creatively, and score, rack up the numbers and rack up the goals like Manchester City did in 2017-18 after their big rebuild following that poor 2016-17 side. I think we'll see a different Manchester City. I'm really excited for it. And yeah, look, things aren't finished. Manchester City will sign more players, I'm sure of it, and they needed to bridge that gap. Manchester City and Liverpool, I think, have done the best business so far. But will it be enough to bridge that gap? I certainly hope so. I think we'll certainly see something exciting and new from Guardiola in a way that might dispel some of those myths about him being robotic and withdrawing the fun out of football. We'll see, and I'll be tuning into the highlights of the game against Al Ain tomorrow morning. But I'm excited to see where it goes, and I'm excited to see the rest of Manchester City this tournament.